Have everybody. We have some things that we have to do. One of our obligations is the presentation and a public hearing on the Low Income Home Energy Assistance Program, known as Liheap. Very good program, and we're going to do that. But before we do that, let us call the roll, Madam Clerk.
Senator Carpenter, Senator Caslin, Senator Embry, Senator Harper Angel, Senator Schickel, Senator Southworth, Senator Turner, Senator Webb, Senator Westerfield, Senator Wheeler, here. Representative Blanton, here. Representative Bowling, here. Representative Bridges, here. Representative Birch, here. Representative Cantrell, Representative Dossett, Representative Dotson,
Present.
Representative Duplessis, Representative Flannery,
Here.
Representative Fugate,
Here.
Representative Johnson,
Here.
Representative Kirk McCormick,
Present.
Representative Marzian, Representative Miles, Representative Gibbons-Prunty, Representative Scott, Representative Stevenson, Representative Wesley,
Here.
Representative White,
Here.
Chair Smith,
Here.
Gotcha. Thank you.
and Chair Gooch.
Here. So, do we have a quorum? Okay. Okay, we do have a quorum, and that's important because in the Liheap program we'll probably have to do some action to renew that program, I think. So at this time, will Jason Dunn, Director of the Division of Family Support for the Department for Community-Based Services, and Roger McCann, Executive Director of Community Action Kentucky, come to the table. Please, since I have introduced you, but go ahead and introduce yourselves for the record, and the floor is yours. Okay, wait, before we do that, gentlemen, we do need a motion to approve the minutes. I didn't call that for first because we were one short of quorum, but we knew how have the quorum. So, motion and a second to approve the minutes. All in favor? All opposed, like sign? Okay, the minutes stand approved as read. So, welcome, and we're glad to have you.
All right, thank you for having us. I know these are new microphones. Is it on? Can you hear me?
Is
okay?
the green light on?
It is on, yes.
Okay, you get
okay. As long as you can hear me.
So that we can hear.
Okay, sure thing. Let me pull it to me a little bit. Okay, thank you. Yes, I am Jason Dunn. I'm the Director of the Division of Family Support in the Department for Community-Based Services, a department within the Cabinet for Health and Family Services.
And I'm Roger McCann. I'm the Executive Director of Community Action Kentucky. We are the representative of the 23 community action agencies in the state of Kentucky.
All right, so thank you for having us, co-chairs and members of the committee. Seems like we were just here last year talking about this. And if you were a member of the committee last year, a lot of this presentation will look very similar to what we presented last year. But we're here to talk about our preliminary state plan for fiscal year 2023. Just a little bit of our organization. You see our Division of Family Support there under the Department for Community-Based Services. Just organizationally, that's where our division rests. We administer these programs. We are the state agency that administers, but we contract those services out with the community action agencies across the state. So let me go on to the next slide. Just a little bit of history about the Liheap program. I like this screen here because I don't have to wear my readers, so this is great. It was established in 1982. It's a part of the safety net that focuses on energy, help with energy costs, heating and cooling, and it's to meet the immediate needs for home energy for low-income households. Generally, they pay a higher portion of their income towards home energy usage, and this is to assist with that. So to date in federal fiscal year 2022, we've spent a total of $71.9 million. Anticipated amount of funding for the next federal fiscal year is $50 million. The reason for that is this year we've had the last 2 or 3 years, we've had a combination of what we would call regular Liheap funds, but we've also had some COVID-specific funding to help during the pandemic. So we
Are
don't.
those all Kentucky numbers?
Yes, this
Thank
is
you.
all Kentucky numbers. Yes.
Thank
Everything you'll see here are Kentucky numbers. So we don't yet know if there's going to be any additional funding for next year or not. We're anticipating $50 million at this point, just based on historic allocations and what we think the increase will be for next year. Gets us to around $50 million for next year. This program is 100% federally funded. 90% of the Liheap award does go directly to benefits, and when we say it goes to residents directly, it goes to the utility provider for the resident directly. It doesn't go through the hands of the individual. We use this money to help pay the bill directly with the utility company. So I want to make sure that's clear. 90% as opposed to 10% of the award up to for administrative costs. We do retain about $400,000 for preventive assistance for families receiving child protection services that can help with the necessary energy payment. And then we'll talk about the weatherization program in a little bit. 15% of this Liheap money goes to fund that weatherization program. It's combined with funding from the Department of Energy. So that 15% and the DOE money go together to fund the weatherization program. That is actually operated by the Kentucky Housing Corporation, but we'll talk a little bit about it here during the presentation. All right. I'm going to turn this part because it's about service delivery and we contract with Community Action. So for this slide, I'm going to hand it over to Roger to talk about that.
So, we have, as I mentioned, the 23 community action agencies are within our association. They have at least one office in every single 120 counties. So we have a presence there. In the past, it was more in person, coming in, visiting with the person there in the office, that sort of thing. We did do some things through outreach. We would go out and meet seniors where they were, or folks in their homes if they were disabled and things. But boy, COVID really changed it. And so we really broadened the spectrum of how we can service people. And, COVID was bad in a lot of ways, and we can go into all that, but it really pushed us to kind of rethink some processes and things like that. And so I kind of try to look at the bright side of it. Well, we do offer electronic. Folks can upload documentation, things like that online. They can do by mail, mail-in applications, do it through correspondence like that. We've always had over the phone, but we really used phone interviews and things like that to back up that mail. Office drop boxes. I remember during COVID, one of our agencies went out and put up metal boxes out in the front lobby, and they had a copier there so that people could come and just simply drop their things in the box or make copies if they needed to. They kind of had a little center set up for them. And so a lot of those things are sticking around. We found that they're good for clients. Electronic sign up, online, mobile apps are great for a lot of folks, but some folks are just not comfortable with that. So the other things work well for that. So we want to try to make sure that we have the program fairly available to all folks in the communities out there. We also started doing a lot more online scheduling. So as we were trying to limit the people in the office, we would do online scheduling. That's been a concern. We had, you don't want somebody standing out in the cold or waiting on a line or something like that. So that's really helped with customer service. They know what to bring in and when to expect and things like that. So like I say, a lot of those things we already did, but boy, COVID really pushed us to do it more, and we really incorporated into our standard operating procedures.
Thanks. Right now, we are going by the income limits are at 150% of the federal poverty guidelines, which you can see here. Typically, in the past, we've kept that at 130%, but we have had this additional funding, and we've had it at 150% for the last 2 or 3 years. Don't know if we'll be able to maintain that. We might need, the amount of benefit we are able to issue is a matter of how much funding we have, what kind of income limits we can put on it, and what the benefit matrix looks like. So A little bit of the mechanics of how Liheap works. We have a couple of different components. There is a subsidy component where anybody who meets the income guidelines can get assistance. There is a crisis component where for folks who are facing imminent shutoff of a utility can come for that, and then emergency assistance, and then the weatherization activities that help with household efficiency and address health and safety issues for low-income families. On the subsidy component, it helps offset the home heating costs, and we're still in heating right now. We'll talk about cooling in a second. We structure the assistance amount according to the tiers that they fall under. You know, different levels of poverty level get different levels of benefits, and then we also look at the percentage or how much the annual heating costs are for a household as well. That subsidy component is open November and December, runs about through mid-December. And we do take early applications in October for household with members who are elderly or have disabilities. And like Roger said, we do some or all of them do appointments. Mainly that helps with not only controlling the traffic, but it also helps working individuals so they can schedule a time when they're not working to come in and apply. During the crisis component, it's for an energy emergency. Typically, we run that application January through April. It's limited to the amount needed to address that emergency with a certain limit. Right now, the limit is $600 for gas or electric. Some folks have bulk heating types, coal, wood, propane. And typically we use the amount, I got to read this just to make sure I say the amount necessary to relieve the crisis, not to exceed the local cost for a deliverable supply of those fuels. Now for the cooling subsidy, it's much like the heating subsidy, offsets those cooling costs. We've been able to operate a cooling program for the last 3 years, and we think it's been vital to be able to do that. We want to be able to continue to do that into the future. When you look at weather-related fatalities, heat is the number one killer across the country. I don't have Kentucky numbers for that, but heat is absolutely the one that people have the most issues with. So we would like to continue that. We have that subsidy component, so anybody who meets meets the income guidelines can get that assistance. We do that May through June, and we actually continue that subsidy through the rest of the summer as well.
Can I ask you the amount of money that is? Of course, I remember when we started the cooling subsidy, we didn't have it at one time. Is that an additional amount of money? Or does it just, you have a certain amount of money and the cooling subsidy comes out of the overall amount, or?
The latter. We have one pot of money, right. and we try to structure, we're constantly keeping an eye on, the usage of benefits and how much is left in the budget and all that stuff. Like I said, it hasn't been too much of an issue lately because we've had those additional funds through pandemic-related appropriations. Something we'll probably need to look closely at next year. Yeah. Let me go through the next one. And then after, usually from July through October, we have operated a cooling subsidy and crisis component at the same time. And again, that maximum limit for the crisis is up to $600. Excuse me. So this just runs through and shows. I have to make a correction here. This is not state fiscal year 2022. We found this mistake last night, the night before last. This is federal fiscal year 2021. So this is from October 1, 2020 through September 30, 2021. That's what these numbers represent. This is a full year of benefits for all the different heating and cooling and subsidy and crisis. Excuse me. So I want to shift a little bit and talk about the Weatherization Program. It's a separate program, but of course it's related to home energy usage. So these are repairs that are related to home energy and home efficiency. Also some health and safety things that we'll talk about in a little bit, but primarily energy efficiency is the focus for the Weatherization Program. And we can serve households up to 200% of the federal poverty level with this funding. It does prioritize households that have an elderly, disabled, or young children, especially young children at risk of removal of a home due to substandard conditions. If we can use these funds to help bring up the condition of the living situation, then we can use it for that. And then high energy burden households where the energy costs exceed 15% or more of the household's income. So some of the activities that the Weatherization Program pays for, activities to increase energy efficiency are the primary focus for this. The first two are probably the most typical, insulation and air infiltration. Less typical, although the program can do this work, is replacing of heating systems, and even less common than that is water heater repair or replacement. We put it on here just to give you an idea of what all it covers, but they're not all equal as far as how often each of those services are provided. So in addition to energy efficiency, we do look at health and safety issues, testing for gas leaks, carbon monoxide, combustible appliances in particular, smoke and carbon monoxide detectors, and then energy education, especially focusing on those households with an elderly, disabled, or young child. You can see there during federal fiscal year 21, we served 442 households. That's a lower number than usual, and that is entirely due to the pandemic. Not everybody wants folks coming into their home when we're all hunkered down during a pandemic, and actually, a lot of these weatherization crews that work for community action agencies, they had a lot of staff that had to quarantine and stuff too. So it is a lower number than we typically see, so we hope to see that expand in the next fiscal year. Now I want to shift to one more thing. We touched on this last year. It wasn't up and running yet, but we were just getting the word that Congress had passed this through the American Rescue Plan Act, and then as part of the Consolidated Appropriations Act. These were COVID-related appropriations for the Low-Income Household Water and Wastewater Assistance Program, or LIWAP. LIWAP, we pronounced it many different ways, but we touched on it. Took a while to get the guidance we needed from our federal partners, and we implemented it in December of 21. Got $18.6 million for the program. We very much modeled it off of Liheap as far as eligibility criteria, so it wasn't confusing either for the staff or people applying for the assistance. If you were income eligible for one, you were income eligible for both. So $18.6 million was our award. We have issued all of that money at this point. So we were able to get those issued, and just wanted to give you a little bit of an idea. Again, households at 150% of federal poverty guidelines. Bill payment assistance for water, wastewater, or a combination of both. Crisis for people who have been disconnected or were facing disconnection. And then a subsidy to help folks who just met the income guidelines to help pay for water assistance. And then you can see the maximum benefits there. $800 for folks in a crisis, and this is up to, depending on the need, and up to $400 in subsidy assistance. I think it's important, again, I want to hit on, these payments didn't go to these households. It went to the utilities that provide the water and the wastewater services. we paid some level of benefit to 363 water and or sewer providers across the state. I had no idea there were that many water companies, water boards in the state of Kentucky. I'm sure there's more than that, but we helped folks who belong to 363 of those. And again, those are these benefits were for the families, but the money goes directly to these utility providers. Some of our water companies are pretty small, and this helped them stay afloat during COVID. So that was a benefit not just to the families they serve, but to the entire community that they were still able to operate. So this gives you an idea of the benefits that were issued both under the subsidy criteria and the crisis criteria. So even though the crisis amount maximum was $800, the average level of assistance was $248. So we didn't come close to hitting the maximum as far as the averages on the benefits that we provided to folks. So between the subsidy and the crisis and the admin, we have gone through that money. We don't have any additional water assistance at this point. There's conversations going on, I think, at the federal level about this, but until there's an appropriation by Congress, we're not in the water business at this point. But and I've hit on the partnerships. Of course, we years ago, many years ago, the Liheap Program was administered by our agency. It just turned out to be too many folks for us to handle at one time. And a long time ago, we contracted with Community Action Kentucky to deliver these services through our community action agencies across the state, and of course with Kentucky Housing Corporation on the Weatherization Program. And at this point, this is when I turn it over to Roger to talk about how these services provided by community action agencies, combine with other services that community action provides.
Well, as I mentioned, I'm Roger McCann. I'm the Executive Director of Community Action Kentucky, and we're the state association for the 23 community action agencies. There's over 1,000 community action agencies in the country. I think 95% of the land mass in the United States is covered by a community action agency. That includes Alaska, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, and all the places. So we are part of a large network of folks all across the state, all across the country that are doing this kind of work. The last slide mentioned partnership. And I know that word gets tossed around a lot, but I think it's really true here. During COVID, we were scrambling to try to help people, and those people are your all's constituents. And I think y'all know well, and I've talked to some of y'all, how some of those folks were really suffering and needed help. And Jason mentioned the water systems and sewer systems. We had some that were close to, very concerned about fiscal solvency and things like that. These programs help those families stay afloat. And I got letters from folks that talked about how this helped them keep their things, keep their family together, keep things on track, and also, some of our utilities, especially the small ones, keep them afloat. It's one tool in our arsenal. It doesn't, getting somebody a $100 subsidy voucher doesn't change their life or change their situation. But if you don't have electricity, going to school, getting to work, having being healthy, those things become much more difficult. So it's a stabilizer in that household to keep that household stable. We're grateful to have that however we want to pronounce it today, the water assistance, because we had a lot of folks who'd gotten behind on water bill as well. And, I mentioned the partnership. I remember there was a issue between what was OCS wanted a rule in place, and it was about how utilities had to waive off a disconnect for so long, but that violated a state reg. And I remember we were on the phone texting back and forth the weekend, and Public Service Commissioner, myself, Jason, we're going back and forth. And Jason reached out to OCS and explained the situation, got a waiver.
OCS is Office
I'm
of
sorry.
Community Services. That's our federal funder at the federal level.
I apologize. I went in acronym mode there on you. And so, we work really hard as a partnership to take these programs, operate them as best we can, and get them to the people and try to do the most good. We're confined within the framework of what the regs say, the laws say, what the funding has, what stipulation the Congress puts on it, and that sort of thing. But within that, we try to make every effort to be effective and efficient as possible across the state. That Liheap program, there's a lot of states that haven't spent their money. I'm going to brag on Kentucky a little bit, and it's not me. It's Jason helped. It's the folks out in the field working with your all's constituents that got that done. We have depleted our benefits to folks. Some states have just barely gotten started. And OCS, the Office of Community Services, picked out Kentucky and has invited me to a thing to talk about how we did it and serve as a model. So I'm proud of that. And I almost want to mention that because it wasn't just me, it was the whole group of everybody putting things together and trying to do the best for citizens of the state. So I want to say that. As I mentioned, it's absolutely essential for a lot of folks. Where we see it, some of the biggest impact is seniors, people on a fixed income. Jason mentioned 1982 when this program was started. It was started under the Reagan administration, and it was in response to the energy crisis. And if you think back about that time, I remember that time. Well, the seniors, they're on that fixed income, Social Security or a pension or whatever, and if things fluctuate, they need that buffer. And we know seniors that they will never not pay that utility bill, but they'll cut something else. And what cuts is food, medicine, something else that's essential, or we think essential, but they will always pay that bill. So that we see a whole lot of seniors take advantage of that program, especially the subsidy programs. And we saw them take advantage of the opportunity there in the summer and in the winter, especially in those subsidy programs. So fixed income, folks with a disability, and we prioritize them in the fall when we sign folks up so that we make sure that we get them that help. I think Jason covered most everything else there, but I think there's a slide there, Jason, if you want to move us forward just a hair.
There we go.
It's this continuous improvement. I always bring it up because that's what we strive for. This is actually required for the CAs by the Community Services Block Grant. If you've ever done ISO or any time of TQM in manufacturing or anything, it's the same thing. You constantly assess and plan and implement, value, look at your results and try to improve. And that's what we do. And I think you saw it with the Liheap program. I think you saw it with the Liheap program and how we used and we're able to utilize that additional COVID funds out there. Kentucky was a leader all the way across the board on helping people with this type of funding. So just want to point that out to you. That about sums it up for me, but I just want to again recognize the partnership we've had with the cabinet over many years, 20 plus years that I've been working with the cabinet through different administrations, everything else, have always put the people first. I appreciate that, and always look forward to coming here and talking to y'all. Y'all give me some good questions sometimes and some suggestions, and some of those things we take back and implement in the program. So thank you for your time, and I appreciate you today.
I will say one more thing is Roger's being too modest, because he mentioned that these programs that help with utilities are often just the tip of the iceberg in what the household needs. And working with community action agencies have a whole lot more programs that are available than just these, depending on where you live, because each area does its own needs assessment and what needs are most important for each community. But if they come in for this assistance, you can get them involved with other things, other programs. And there are employment programs with community action. And this is a foot in the door to say, do you need help with, finding a job or keeping a job or whatever, all kinds of success stories that I've seen with, and that's a whole nother thing we can get into later. But right now we're just talking about this program.
Sure. Well, the conversation often goes, somebody comes in, they say, I need help with my bill. And we say, well, what happened? Why didn't you pay your bill? Well, I got laid off. And I said, well, we need to get you another job. Well, yeah, they require GED. I don't have one. Well, what's the number one reason people don't get GED? Well, child care, because they got to somebody watch their child. Transportation to get there. You know, the adult education center might be out in the county somewhere, and they don't have a ride. So we operate transportation. Some places we are the public transportation. A lot of communities. We want to get them there, get them their GED, and we have licensed child care facilities. And so, can we get them into a child care, or can we refer them to somebody with child care so they get that GED? They might say, well, I have to have steel-toe boots. Well, can we get you a pair of steel-toe boots? If that's all that's keeping you from being employed, let's find out what those things are. So I mentioned it's a tool. It's part of the arsenal. But we work with EKSEP down in Southeast Kentucky. We have transportation. We work with public health. We're working on a Kentucky Women's Cancer Screening Program to get low-income women cancer screening. We're working with some private partnerships with some corporations to get co-op students to go out and do co-op training with manufacturers, because we really need more people trained in manufacturing. So you're right, it's just a piece, and I know that's what we came here to talk
I didn't want to miss that piece.
But yeah, thank you, appreciate that. So yeah.
Okay, well that concludes our presentation. If y'all have any questions, we'll be happy to take
Representative
those.
Kurt McCormick.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to say I commend you folks on this program.
Thank you.
In my prior career of 30 plus years, daily I referred people to the Community Action Program. And without these services assisting these people, these families would have fell apart. The children would have been removed. They would have ended up in state custody. Your elderly people depend so much on getting these resources during the cold and hot times of the year. Your Weatherization Program is an awesome program. I have literally utilized every single program that you offer. I kind of grew up with Community Action. My sister's on the board, and she was a coordinator for many years in southeastern Kentucky. And one of our local people actually wrote this program in eastern Kentucky, and that was Everett Horn Jr. He literally wrote the program for eastern Kentucky and actually got it into eastern Kentucky back several years ago. I certainly hope that this program continues to receive all the funding that they need. And actually, I don't think they receive enough funding, because I have so many, even as a legislator, my constituents calling me and telling me, can you help me? And first thing I do is I refer them to Community Action, and they tell me they're out of funds. And are you able to move some of the funds around to other programs that's not being used? And can you use funds that's not spent in certain regions? Can you carry that over to the regions that actually need these funding?
Yeah, so can we move funds from one to another? Sometimes, and we do ask for permission to do that. Sometimes that's a lot of, a fight we have to do. Negotiating is probably the better term for it. But yeah, if we can. Now, with the additional COVID-related funding, we've had a good amount of funding. We've still run out in some of the programs. But even in normal times, I guess you want to call it, we would see spending higher in certain areas of the state. And so in Liheap crisis, for example, we would see some agencies depleting their funding and some still with a surplus. And we do calculations based upon average spend rate and things like this to see how fast funds are going and when we think we're going to run out. And if there's ever a time where we would see excessive funds in one area that may not get spent by the deadline, we've put out the call, hey, does anybody want to, release some of their allocation back to us so we can divert it over here? And I remember the last time we did, we had about 6 or 7 agencies that said, small amounts, but they put them over there and they were able to do that. So yeah, we try to, you do formula to try to say, here's where we project the need is going to be, but then as you're going along, you monitor that, and if you think you can do a better job or move it within the state, we can. We always work back with the cabinet and say, hey, this is our plan, this is what we're going to do, make sure that we're in the clear there, but they've always been supportive of trying to do that. When we do end with a program and we have a date cut off, we don't just let the money allocate back to the Fed, and this is more of your side of it, but we roll that over and build another program. So what was left over from winter crisis this year, we roll into a spring program, for example, or into a summer program. And, you know, we're thinking now about our fall subsidy and what's going to happen there. But the federal does allow for rollover year to year. And so we have been able to work that out so that Kentucky does not send money back. We do utilize it. I agree with you that we could use more money.
Oh, absolutely.
But I'm especially hopeful that they will decide to make that Liheap program permanent, because there's not a lot of water and sewer funding out there, and there hasn't been a formal program like that that's been, you know, statewide. So I'm hoping that they'll make that permanent as well.
Yes.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, we've proven the water program can work. Yes.
Oh, absolutely. We've watched it. We've seen it being
Right.
utilized all over. So thank you.
Right.
Senator Southworth.
Thank you. I wanted to ask you a little bit more, and you talked about the 3 key populations, and the third one you were talking about children and trying to prevent removals. And this past year we passed Senate Bill 8, and the first biggest thing that stuck out to me the most was we were going to remove or exclude poverty as a definition of neglect. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned here we haven't used the max, or people aren't necessarily using the max of the allocations that are available, and particularly maybe because of COVID funding. But in a normal time, are we using the max? Are we meeting 100% of the need, or are kids still being removed simply for a poverty reason? And is that going to change because of this change in the law?
It starts to get out of my realm a little bit, Senator Southworth, when we start talking about how the monies are used for prevention efforts, and I can get you data on that. It's not something that I look at every day. I know that it's available and it's used, but I'll have to get back with you on some more detail about that. Just to make sure, I know how much we allocate for that, but I don't know, like the 400,000 that you saw earlier in the presentation. Is that the part you're talking about?
Well, I was really thinking like on the max average assistance.
Yeah.
300,
Right.
200, 100, and the max is like 600, and same thing with the other figures. So
Right.
it just doesn't look like everyone's using it all, but perhaps a lot of people are capping out, and maybe those are the ones with the kids. That's what I'm trying to get to the bottom of.
There's households that are absolutely up to the max, and then households that to resolve their crisis, the amount is much lower. So that's why the average is as low as it is. We wanted to give that cushion in case somebody did have that much of an arrearage, which, you know, it's usually not the fault of the individual. It's the housing stock that we have, you know, that it's aging. As it ages, it's not as energy efficient as it needs to be. So, you know, for every average that you see, you know, there's a lot of families above that and then some below that.
And I think you're referring to the crisis program. So the crisis program has like a $600 maximum.
Right.
And so the way that works is it's based upon the need. So if a person gets a disconnect notice and they need $100 to catch up and prevent that disconnect from occurring, then the program will cover that. So that $100 will go on their bill. Now, the program is set up so that if they were to need more during that segment of the program, they can continue to reapply and come back, but they max out at 600. It was lower.
I think you're right.
It was lower, and then we actually raised it during COVID because our conversations with utilities were showing that those arrearages were increasing dramatically.
Right.
So we had set it at $600 to increase that. I think that the idea is that when we set it at 600, we know what the averages look like, and we're setting it so that we capture most people's arrearage, but we don't want to set it so high that we are putting it into fewer families and not helping more.
Right.
Most families, maybe they need just one bill's worth of payment, so 600 is maybe 2 bills worth of payment. So if they were behind 60 or 90 days, we could capture that typically. So I think that it's effective in the way that was set because it is helping the most people keep the power on. Raising it to, a whole lot higher would not make it more effective, for example, but it might capture a few more households, but that was a good threshold. So you go into it with a prediction, you try to look at the numbers. We pull data from PSC, we pull data from the utilities, we poll them, and try to find out what a good number looks like when we go into those. And that's, again, we constantly evaluate.
Right.
As far as data going as to whether or not that prevented a case with child services or somebody being removed, we don't capture that. But we do prioritize homes that are in danger of children being removed on the weatherization program. It is a question on the application. And so what weatherization has is you have a point system. Weatherization is very formula based. It looks at whether or not you can actually help the home become more energy efficient. And it has a pretty intricate point system. But if that box is checked on that application goes to the front of the line. Lots of times weatherization services don't, caulking window doesn't necessarily change that. But if it was because of a health and safety issue, a carbon monoxide issue, something like that, faulty equipment or something like that, then the weatherization person can go in and evaluate that, maybe apply those services to the home to stop that issue, to correct that issue, and then resolve an issue where a child may be removed. So there is a prioritization on the weatherization program.
But we're getting way off topic
I'm sorry.
here.
We are.
As far as the
Yeah.
and I know these
We're
things
talking
are
about
all
life.
intertwined and that sort of thing. But as you say, there's a lot of other programs that can help in some of those things. So finally, Representative Miles.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for what you do. We really appreciate that. I do have a question. I know it was in the slides about, a lot of this comes down to the assistance part of it, as far as once they're set up on their electricity and things like that. What is the beginning part of that if they need to sign up for electricity to start with? So where do we send people whenever they call us and they've access to housing, they need their electricity set up, they've been told that they can get assistance to pay their bill, but how do they actually, what avenue can you recommend to tell people whenever they call how to get actually set up to start with?
Typically, and again, we work with what tools we have and what the parameters are. We can help with that. So we can help somebody get set up with a new account. Our folks work very closely with those utilities and can talk to them and say, hey, we're trying to get this person established.
So call Community Action directly for that
Yep.
request? Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
Fine. I'm gonna wrap this up, and because there's some things that we have to do here. But let me first say that 40 years ago I was mayor of my community, and I worked with community action agencies a lot, even on things like Section 8 vouchers for rent and that sort of thing, and all of these types of programs. So you guys do a great job, and I think we all agree that this is a great program. And in the past, I can remember before pandemic money, often what was happening though is there was X amount of dollars, the money was, you had the program lasted as long as the money was there.
Right.
And one of the things that really bothers me sometimes, and like I say, I love this program. I'm not criticizing it. I'm not criticizing you guys. I think though where I do have a little bit of a problem is that sometimes we create a program like this, and we think that, well, now that we've created this program, then all the other things we don't do, all the other things we do don't matter. And what I'm talking about is January of 2021, I can remember probably the price of natural gas was about $3, less than $4. I think I checked yesterday and it was like 7 something, and it's been more than that. Home heating oil prices have probably more than doubled since January of 2021. There's no question that propane is way up. Gasoline probably was $1.90, $2 a gallon is now in many cases over $5. And what bothers me is that sometimes people will not consider the consequences of their actions that cause real hardships to these people, and they say, well, but we have this program, Liheap, that's going to help them. Mm-hmm. And that's really just kind of a cop-out. It makes them feel good, but they support policies that really do put hardships on people. And I think that we have to understand that we can feel good about these programs, but they don't negate our other actions. We have to be constantly doing things that we can to protect our people as far as the cost, whether it's inflation, whether it's fuel costs, whether it's any of these things, whether it's regulations that drive up the cost of sewer and sewer sanitation systems. All those things have an impact on people, and having a program that just lasts until it runs out of money each year is really not a substitute for us really taking our job seriously. So with that, but again, thank you so much, and that's not in any way a criticism of you, it's a criticism of us more than that. This Liheap block application has to be done every year. What we do is we, having this public hearing, we have a finding of facts. You have in your packet a list of the findings of facts. I'm not going to read them all because you can read them yourself, but it includes things like that Liheap funds specified in this application have been included in an appropriation provision or a branch budget bill enacted by the General Assembly in anticipation of such application. So if you want to, you can read down through that. But what we have to do to continue this program is to adopt these findings of fact. So do we have a motion?
Second.
And a second? Okay, clerk, call the roll, please.
Senator Carpenter, Senator Caslin, Senator Embry, Senator Harper Angel, Senator Schickel, Senator Southworth,
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to pass until I can finish reading this.
Senator Turner,
I apologize, I haven't read it in detail yet, so I'm going to pass.
Senator Webb, Senator Westerfield, Senator Wheeler, Representative Blanton, Representative Bowling,
Yes.
Representative Bridges, Representative Birch, Representative Cantrell, Representative Dossett, Representative Dotson,
Yes.
Representative Duplessis, Representative Flannery,
Yes.
Representative Fugate,
Yes.
Representative Johnson,
Yes.
Representative Kirk McCormick,
Yes.
Representative Marzian, Representative Miles, Representative Gibbons Prunty, Representative Scott, Representative Stevenson, Representative Wesley,
Yes.
Representative White,
Yes.
Chair Smith,
Aye.
and Chair Gooch.
Yes. It passes. So thank you
Mr.
very much.
Chairman?
Yes.
I would like to vote yes. I
Okay.
read it
yes.
while we were doing it.
Okay. We've got you. Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is a study that we felt like we really needed to have. As you know, grid reliability and the summer energy demand is very important to us to make sure that there are people out there who are planning and overseeing the reliability of our electric grid and making sure that it's working. And so we thought that it'd be good to have someone come and do that. And so we're pleased to have Melissa Seymour. She's Vice President of External Affairs at the Mid-Continental Independent Systems Operators, known as MISO. And I think in our area, we have MISO predominantly, maybe some PJM in some parts. What? Okay. And so thank you very much. Appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm gonna see if I can pull up a presentation for, oh, you know how to do this. Well, while she's pulling it up, so thank you for having me. Again, I'm Melissa Seymour, Vice President of External Affairs at Miso. And this has become more and more of an important conversation I've been having with legislators across the Miso footprint. So when I show you that, this is something that a lot of the legislators are very interested in, given some of the feedback that has been coming through the media around issues with our power grid going forward. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. So what I want to do is start by talking a little bit about what is a MISO, and it is MISO and not miso. So a lot of people think it's the soup, but it's not. I'm going to do that. I'm going to talk about what I call resource adequacy and what that really means and how it's determined by MISO, and then talk a little bit about our last, what we have as a planning resource auction, which is how we trade power in the MISO footprint, and talk about what all of this means for the upcoming summer and winter seasons. So first, first, MISO is an independent, not-for-profit transmission organization. We deliver reliability and cost-effective electric power across 15 U.S. states and a Canadian province of Manitoba. In Kentucky, our members include Big Rivers and the city of Henderson, where about 14% of Kentucky's retail sales are in the MISO footprint. So MISO is responsible for maintaining this system reliability and really facilitating those wholesale power transactions across that multi-state footprint. MISO does not own generation or transmission assets. Our members do. So Big Rivers and the city of Henderson in Kentucky. The easiest way to think of MISO is really like the air traffic controller of the power grid. We manage the flow of power on the system to minimize congestion and maintain reliability. So our markets select the most reliable and efficient supply resources, and we have processes to determine which resources are needed at what time to supply power at the lowest cost and to maintain reliability. This means that consumers receive the power that makes the most sense to produce, and this is the value that we create across the entire footprint. Oops. So after launching our energy-only market back in 2005, the value that we brought to the region became apparent. And so to quantify the value, MISO, in collaboration with its stakeholders, created the MISO value proposition to provide a measure of MISO's achievements. The annual value proposition study began in 2007 and quantifies the value MISO provides to the region, including MISO's market participants and their customers. One of the largest benefit categories you see here is the reduced need for additional assets. Because of MISO's diverse and expansive footprint, individual utilities are able to have less generation than they would need on their own if they weren't part of the MISO footprint to meet customers' energy need. This resulted in a significant cost savings for end-use consumers. So our costs for MISO are about $325 million, and our 2021 value proposition shows we provide about $3.4 billion in annual economic benefits to the region. And our cumulative savings since 2007 is about $36 billion. At the end of the day, consumers save more than $3 billion a year, which equates to about $5 spent by a residential electric ratepayer, provides between $56 and $77 in value-added services and benefits annually. So I'm going to pause and talk about resource adequacy for a moment, and that could be a term that you might be familiar with, but in case you're not, I'm going to talk a little bit about the difference between what I'm going to call capacity and energy. So our electric system is planned and built to accommodate the highest expected level of electric consumption or peak demand, and to ensure all consumers have working lights, air conditioners, heat, and other appliances on even the hottest days or the coldest winters. In short, there must be enough power to produce the amount of electricity needed on those highest demand days and some spare amount that can be drawn from in the event of an issue, such as an unexpected outage at one or more power plants or an extreme weather event like we saw in Winter Storm Uri a couple years ago. If you think of a shopping mall parking lot, Most mall parking lots are sized with enough space to handle levels during peak shopping periods like around the Christmas holiday. On most days during the rest of the year, however, the lot is only partially full. So MISO, working with state regulators and electricity providers, take a similar approach to ensuring there's enough electric capacity in place to keep the lights on during peak periods. The capacity may not always be used, but is committed to MISO in case it's needed to serve customers to ensure reliable services even at peak periods. So resource adequacy goes hand in hand with reliability. When MISO talks about reliability, what we typically mean is maintaining the supply and load balance so there are no cascading outages. We match supply to load until we run out of supply, and then we match load to supply. Our markets allow us to do that very efficiently and effectively, and our control room operators are there to ensure the system is doing it right. Utilities that manage the distribution system, such as Jackson Purchase, Meade County Rural Electric Cooperative, Kenergy, and the City of Henderson, think about reliability differently. To a distribution company, reliability normally means minimizing the frequency and duration of distribution line failures, whether it's from a storm toppling trees on lines or a squirrel getting into a transformer. But for an end-use consumer, reliability is easy to define. When I flip on a switch, my lights come on every time, all the time. And a consumer reacts to outages can be different depending on the cause. They tend to understand if the lights are out due to a storm, a very visible cause. Of course, they want to see evidence of efforts to repair the damage and eliminate repetition of the issue. However, inadequate supply or resource adequacy issues is a cause they don't find acceptable. They feel it's unexplainable to them, which is why I'm focusing on resource adequacy in my remarks. So what is resource adequacy in the MISO footprint? It's the responsibility of our load-serving entities, so our utilities, with the states to maintain resource adequacy. MISO's resource adequacy processes are currently designed as a residual market to allow these load-serving entities to efficiently use any excess capacity that other members may have. It also serves as the measure of whether a load-serving entity has worked together to achieve agreed-on risk tolerance levels for each summer period. Our planning reserve market ensures enough resources are committed to the MISO footprint to supply the highest expected demand levels plus that cushion in an upcoming year. This total value is called the planning reserve margin requirement, and each load-serving entity, such as your local utility, is required to own or contract for enough resources to cover that portion of the requirement. This approach assumes that if peak demand can be covered, then the resources will be adequate for all other levels throughout the year. At this point in the process, the capacity of the resource, or the amount the planners estimate will be available during peak, which can be different than its installed capacity, or the maximum electricity it can produce under ideal conditions, is the focus. Several factors can impact a generator's ability to supply power, and each is given a credit for the amount of capability based on those factors, which can then be counted toward their requirement. First, the resource type matters. In general, resources whose output is more predictable are given greater resource credit. Resources whose output are more variable due to the nature of their fuel source, such as wind and solar, are given lower credit, which is based on their actual output during the highest demand periods historically. MISO is currently seeing a lot of traditional resources retiring and being replaced with mostly renewable generation. Due to the impact variability has on the capacity credit, it takes significantly greater volumes of renewable resources to cover the requirement. A second factor that impacts capacity credit is historical performance, and more time out of service creates greater uncertainty around a resource's availability, contributing to a lower credit value. The geographic location of each generator also matters. While the highly interconnected nature of the power grid generally allows power to flow across utility boundaries and state lines, there are places where capacity limitations restrict the amount of electricity that can flow. To account for this reality, the MISO region is divided up into areas from outside of utility zones that can be used to count toward the capacity requirement. A certain amount of resources identified a power provider to meet the requirement must be located in one of the zones that you see here on the map. With the capacity value determined for each resource, providers then identify enough capacity or credit to cover their portion of the requirement. MISO administers an annual capacity auction to facilitate this process. Within the auction, there are several options that a provider can use to demonstrate they have adequate resources. They can use their own resources, they can contract with other power suppliers for some of all the needed capacities, or load-serving entities can purchase excess capacity credits offered in the auction by other suppliers. At a predetermined point in time, the auction is executed, resulting in the lowest priced offer needed to meet the requirement or selected to provide capacity a clearing price determines for each zone. As Chair Chandler from the Kentucky Public Service Commission discussed with you back in November, Kentucky is a vertically integrated state and requires utilities to do a 15-year integrated resource plan. These plans help ensure that Kentucky utilities have sufficient resources to meet their customers' needs today and in the future. Resources identified in the integrated resource plans are what Kentucky utilities use to meet their planning reserve margin requirements in MISO's resource adequacy process. So MISO held its capacity auction back in April for the period of June 2022 through May 2023. Several areas in the MISO footprint fell short of having enough capacity to meet their customers' demand plus the reserve margin needed to account for unexpected events. If there had been enough capacity in other parts of MISO, this capacity could have been used to cover the shortfall. So our forecasts have shown that this outcome was becoming more likely. Our generation fleet has been evolving in extraordinary ways for years. In the last year's survey of supply and demand, we projected that MISO's central region, which includes Kentucky, would have tight conditions this year. And this year's survey, the results of which are shown on this slide, show that the entire MISO region could face potential capacity shortfalls beginning as early as 2023 if new resources don't materialize to make up the shortfall. While Kentucky utilities may not be seeing the same capacity shortfall as other utilities in the MISO footprint, MISO is a mutual insurance pool, so actions taken by other areas and states have an impact on overall resource adequacy. We've seen aggressive decarbonization goals and policies are spurring a race to retirement of thermal resources such as coal. With the accelerated fleet evolution, we are at risk of a gap between system needs and the resource fleet's accredited capacity and characteristics. We must manage this resource transition and maintain reliability. Unless more capacity is built or bought, especially a capacity able to reliably generate during tight system conditions, the shortfalls we experienced this year would continue and get worse going forward. So resources that want to interconnect to the transmission system go through MISO's generator interconnection queue. This slide provides a summary of what resources are in the queue today and what we have seen historically. As you can see, a large majority of the resources looking to interconnect to the grid are utility-scale solar. There are about 2,400 megawatts of new generation capacity in the queue in Kentucky. The majority of that is solar, and the remainder is battery storage or battery storage paired with solar. We will need these new resources to materialize so that we can fill the gap I mentioned that is being caused by the retiring resources. So what does all of this mean for the summer? MISO's summer assessment aligns with the planning resource auction outcomes, indicating the growing need for emergency procedures to keep the system in balance, as well as the need for increased reliance on imports and more resource flexibility to reliably generate and manage the uncertainty of extreme weather. Our normal processes proactively monitor and take action to ensure enough generation is available to meet demands of the bulk electric system in our regions. But as weather and corresponding load forecasts change, additional resources must be committed, including long lead generation resources. MISO follows emergency operating procedures, which set forth a series of escalating actions that MISO can take to address grid emergencies. Emergency conditions can be required in the event of a combination of significant unplanned generator outages or derates, or during the hottest or coldest times when the need of electricity is the greatest. The first step in the process that MISO takes is conservative operations and weather alerts. These allow MISO to coordinate with generation and transmission owners to reschedule, recall, or accelerate completion of maintenance. Another step in our action plan calls on customers that have chosen to participate in demand response programs while saving on the cost of the capacity procurement. If needed, all actions short of load shed are implemented. So temporary coordinated power outages are extremely rare, and a last step emergency measure implemented to protect the electric grid. MISO has never taken that step in Kentucky. We continue to communicate with our member utilities every day to coordinate plans for any obstacles such as extreme heat and reliably forecast how much energy homes and businesses will need across the region. So what is MISO doing about this resource shortage and the resource adequacy issue? So we have developed and will continue to improve market mechanisms to ensure the system is resource adequate and reliable going forward. For example, we are making sure resource adequacy credits all resources receive are commensurate with their availability during peak times. This includes a sophisticated modeling and evaluation of wind and solar resources. Since we are seeing more reliability issues outside the summer period, we have filed a proposal with our regulator to move to a seasonal evaluation of resource needs. And we have also filed a proposal to require utilities to have 50% of their capacity requirements owned or contracted for prior to the planning resource auction. So MISO will continue to work with our member utilities and states to find ways to manage the gap and to ensure resource adequacy and reliability are maintained. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Representative Blanton?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your presentation. I hear things like some of the shutdowns, retirements, and the impact of apparently looking at renewables to try to replace some of that. And it sounds like that they just aren't available, at least to the level that you need them. So is MISO concerned about the current pace of the retirement of these plants?
Absolutely. We think that the pace of the retirement of the plants is not, we're not getting new resources online at the same pace as we are retiring the plants. So we feel that gap is causing a problem in the supply of resources that we have to address. So we either have to slow down the pace of retirement or speed up getting new capacity online.
Other question, Mr. Besides not having enough electricity during these peak demands, what other reliability problems are you encountering or do you anticipate encountering caused by these premature coal retirements?
Well, I think there's other concerns that you could have on the transmission system. One of the things that we look at when a coal plant retires is its ability to provide other services, reliability services to the electric grid. And one of the things that MISO can actually do, we do have the power to do, is keep a plant online for those reliability services. So, for example, voltage support or frequency response, we can actually keep a plant online if we don't have an alternative solution at the time the plant is required to retire. So that's one thing that we do, and we make sure that the grid can maintain reliability with the plant retiring, but we cannot keep the plant online for resource adequacy purposes.
One last question, Mr. Chairman. Would you agree that making sure that MISO can provide electricity and be more reliable even during peak times if you have access to more coal and more coal-fired generated plants than what you're experiencing now?
Well, we are, as MISO, we're pretty fuel agnostic. So I can't say coal-fired plants, but what I can say is we want access to generation that's reliable and dependable and that's flexible enough to be there when we need peak demand periods.
And that's fossil fuels.
It can be a number of generators, but fossil fuels do have that characteristic.
Let me follow up on that. I mean, I understand where the representative's going there, but I view the availability of well, first of all, I think that to me, reliability simply is the ability of a utility to generate and dispatch electricity when it's needed. And resiliency is the ability to maintain reliability in extreme weather. That's maybe simplistic, but that's my view. I think that when you have a generator that has on-site power storage, which with the coal plant it's the stockpile, with nuclear it's the fuel right inside the reactor, and even maybe natural gas, good fuel, but it's just-in-time fuel in my opinion. You hook it up to a pipeline, and as long as there's gas arriving, you can generate electricity. But if you have a disruption in that supply or more demand, then there's somebody doesn't have the ability to generate electricity. So, I think that's where I view our ability to maintain reliability is based on generation facilities that have 85-90% efficiency because they have storage on site and the ability to ramp up and generate electricity. Is that more of a
Yeah, that is an important, especially periods we find in the winter period when we have prolonged periods of cold weather, like Winter Storm Uri. That on-site fuel supply was key in maintaining our power grid, and we did have issues with natural gas and the home heat demand as compared to the natural gas availability for generation facilities. Storage can be also a storage facility can also be a good mechanism to do that, even though it's not on site, but it can store electricity for up to 4 hours normally on a typical battery. So batteries can have that capability too. But yes, we think on-site fuel is extremely important, especially in the winter time periods.
Right. Well, and I don't disagree with that. I think that I typically like more long-range storage. I know we have a lot of batteries now, very expensive, but they can only store very short term, a couple hours.
Yep.
A couple hours is not enough in time, in my opinion, to be able to provide long-term. And I think we'll get there at some point,
Right.
but we're not there yet. So I may have some other questions, but I have some other committee members that want to ask questions as well. Representative Miles.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I think we're kind of thinking along the same lines between Representative Blanton and Chairman Gooch of the concern. I'll ask two questions and I'll ask them at the same time. You can answer however you wish. Does MISO actually have any type of influence over the concern? I know you talked about a little bit of helping on the transmission and things like that, but does MISO actually have any input on the premature closure of coal mines without a transition to another reliable source? And then has MISO experienced anything along with the financial institutions of limiting access to capital and things like that to your providers that are providing your access, along the lines of, we hear from it through the national side of it, of the investments of not allowing investments in fossil fuels, natural gas, different things along those lines, if it's not what's considered green or things like that. So could you comment on both of those items, please?
Sure, and the answer to both of them is we don't have any influence over that. Our states, we leave resource decisions up to our states and policymakers in the states. We're pretty much policy takers at MISO, so whatever a state decides it wants to do or a EPA decides it wants to do, we have to figure out how to manage the grid in that situation. I will tell you that we will provide feedback. We recently provided feedback to EPA around their coal ash rule, around the premature closures of coal plants and the reliability risk that has with it. We provided those as comments. But we really don't have any influence over keeping those plants online, nor the investment decisions that are being made on plants like coal plants going forward. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Representative Kurt McCormick.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Europe is looking to restart mothballed coal plants. Are there any recent retirements in the MISO footprints, more importantly in Kentucky, that could be restarted to help with capacity shortage?
Yeah, we've had quite a few. I'm trying to think of the number coal plant retirements. I'm not 100% sure about Kentucky, but in Indiana we've had a few that I'm aware of in the zone that you're in. I'm not sure how hard it would be to restart a coal plant. I mean, you'd have to get everybody back on site. You'd have to get it depends on how long it's closed. I think there haven't been any conversations that I'm aware of to restart a coal plant at this point in any part of the MISO footprint, and we've seen quite a few closures. A lot of those closures were for environmental reasons, but a number of the closures are just because the utilities are getting a lot of pressure from their investors to be more green. But we haven't seen, and I'm not sure how hard it would be to get fully staffed and get up to speed on another coal plant. I know coal is in demand right now, and there's some shortages of coal supply because of the supply chain issues. So I'm just not aware of what it would take.
Second question, Mr. Chairman, quickly. I have been reading that a lot of the power grids in our whole nation is old, and they're very vulnerable. Can you elaborate on that? Is that a fact? And at how much risk are we with these older grids and being so vulnerable?
Yeah, we haven't seen a lot of investment in the transmission system, so the grid, the actual transmission power lines in many years. We're starting to see that come back. We are actually in MISO putting in $10 billion of transmission with our members in the next 10 years. It does take a long time to build the grid. I feel like from a security perspective, we have done a lot of updates to the grid, piecemeal kind of through time to keep it secure. And I feel like we spend a lot of time on security and cybersecurity and other measures to make sure that the power grid stays secure. And we take a lot of we make sure that a lot of the information is protected around our power grid. So there's a lot of rules in place to make sure that's protected. So I feel pretty good about that. I just think that the aging fleet and the aging transmission system is something that's going to need to be replaced, and we're kind of doing it a little bit at a time, but it just takes many years to get it done.
Thank you.
I've seen figures suggesting that nationwide, I think maybe 14 gigawatts, which of coal-fired generation, and maybe Kentucky 4 to 5, or 3 to 4 gigawatts, maybe 4 to 5, which would be 3 to 4,000 megawatts.
Yeah.
You know, so it's pretty astounding the amount that we're looking to take offline this year, and it's not something that personally I think is sustainable myself, but I'm just a state representative. So, Representative Wesley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have just a question. I would like to say that last year I visited Western Kentucky, Riverview Coal, just marvelous people over there, and I visited back home this past month, which is Eastern Kentucky. I do know that there was an attack on coal several years back through the Obama administration, and to go back home to see what has happened to coal has been heartbreaking, because we was raised up in Eastern Kentucky, and I love the coal miners. The question is, they have an achievement through the Biden administration that they stated that their goal is to put out coal before 2035. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And if that is correct and that is achieved, how do you plan on dealing with that? I mean, we depend on coal so much. And I'm going to give you an example, if I may, Mr. Chairman. There was a certain college campus that was picketing and protesting against some of our young guys, students that was going through college, that was putting themselves through college by working for coal. And as they was working and still paying their tuition and everything they need to go through college, this campus came against these young students for going through classes to be an engineer for coal mining. And But at the end of the day, that whole campus is supplying their hot water by coal. And so my question is, how do we plan on getting rid of coal and then providing the needs that we don't tell the public about, how that we are using coal on day-to-day basis? So my question is, if their goal is to get rid of coal, and we've allowed 7 coal mines to be shut down in the last year, is the way I understand it, or last 2 years, then how do we plan on having a backup if we shut them down completely?
Well, I think that's the challenge I just talked about in my comments, because we can't keep coal plants online unless there's a transmission reliability issue. And so I think there is going to be a challenge because there's going to be a gap. And I don't think the 2035 date, in MISO's opinion, we're not policymakers, but we will commit that we think that it is hard to achieve, given the transmission infrastructure that we have today. You could foresee having wind and solar in certain areas that were more productive than maybe Kentucky. Like you could have winds in the South Dakota, North Dakota area and move it. But you have to have transmission infrastructure. And it takes years and years and years to build transmission infrastructure. And so that transition to that cleaner future is probably going to take a lot longer than 2035 if we want to go there. And we're going to have some natural gas-fired plants to replace some of these coal plants, because we need the flexibility and the characteristics of those plants to be available when the sun isn't shining and the wind's not blowing. So we do need something to fill that gap.
Ms. Seymour, did you have a slide at one point that showed what the mix is of the MISO grid? Okay, that one there. What does that show?
Yeah, so right now MISO is 42% gas, 29% coal. We're 8% nuclear. We're 19% renewables, which is all wind, mostly wind, and then that yellow is other. I think we have some hydro.
Okay. Now, one other question, and Senator Smith is going to ask some questions. We're all seeing a really big push to electric vehicles. Kentucky is positioned ourselves as kind of a battery capital of the world, and some of the things that I'm seeing is that at the shift that we're talking about, we might need an additional 30% in generation and grid capacity. How do we get there?
Yeah, that's a great question, because when we are looking out into the future and building our transmission lines and thinking about how much we have 3 futures that we use. One is sort of status quo, so it's sort of we're going to build out renewables, but our future 3 is electrification. So it's how much more demand are we going to have that we're going to have to fill in at all times of the day for charging vehicles. And so we're very concerned that we're having an issue meeting the demand as it is today without the electrification. And so we're going to need just that many more resources and capacity that I talked about to meet that electrification if that does take off and become more of a load on our system. So yeah, that is one of the concerns. That's why we're building about $10 billion in transmission to move things around so that we know where we put the resources, we can actually move them to the load centers and make sure that they can meet those requirements. But again, that takes a large-scale transmission line can take up to 10 years to get built.
Senator Smith.
Yes, thank you, Chairman Gooch. I appreciate you making your presentation in front of the committee today, and I have a few questions for you, if you don't mind. MISO's footprint's divided into 10 zones. If you look at the capacity prices in MISO zones 1 through 7, which includes Kentucky, among other states, these prices here are almost 50 times higher than they were for previous auctions. Why? What's happening in this region that's so different from everyone else?
So what happened is, we have, when we do our planning resource auction, power plants will bid in what they need to be supply the capacity. The reason it was so high this month is because we hit a point when there wasn't enough capacity to meet the load obligation. So we didn't have enough resources in the zones in the green and blue in the map.
When you're saying resources like coal, for example, would be one of the
Coal,
resources.
gas, wind, solar.
Because what you mentioned earlier, supply was a big part of the problem, and I certainly want to hear you finish it, but it's really not supply when you've got companies across many parts of Eastern Kentucky that have closed down, and a lot of people that we have family members in this room that work for companies that can't get their permits renewed right now. So there's
That's
a
right.
lot of, I think, bureaucracy coming down from the federal level and other places that are preventing this coal from getting to the market. So it's not just not able to get on the train, it's not able to get it out of the ground because of a lot of paperwork. So I'll turn it back over to you to finish that up, please.
Yeah, so the only thing I was going to say is because we didn't have enough capacity to meet the requirements of our north and central region, we went to what we call the cost of new entry. So it's a new power plant, and that's the price that clears the auction when you don't have enough capacity to meet the obligation. So that was the $236 for capacity.
And that's what I was going to ask you next, is if you look at 21, 22, our prices for capacity were $5 per megawatt day, and then you look at what they are now and what they're projected at the maximum. Of course, if it was higher, they'd probably go higher, but
Yeah.
that's just tremendous for us to understand. And my question is to me, that price signals obviously that there's not enough generation out there to handle it, that there's not enough product resources, as you say, coming into the line of what Kentucky is a rich state. And we're rich in coal, gas, and many other things that we can provide. And for some reason, we've had over 318 coal mines closed since I've been in service down here across Eastern Kentucky, and they happen in basically 2 administrations. So it's a pretty staggering number. It's obviously a shift in policy compared to what we're used to. Those are all resources there that could create what you need there to get these prices down. I'd have to have companies be told that you're going to be denied power for so many days. Tell us which are the best days or the time of day to have your power taken from you in the United States of America. And I'm walking through the wastelands of Inez and Jenkins and many other places. I see the gentleman from Sandy Hook back here who's with me knows many places that we grew up in that were full, that you couldn't buy a block of coal. So I think that this is a tremendous part of failed policy here. But to wrap my question up with you is that hearing about it now, and for all of us that follow this stuff, we've been watching it come. We talked about it last year. I think we've made a big fuss about it, but this all didn't just happen in 1 year. But why are we seeing so much follow-up from right now? What would you tell our committee up here of why all this is sort of hitting now?
Well, I think the level and race to retirement has been swifter in this industry than we have seen in decades, right? So I think policy has changed, but I also think that individual utilities are making decisions based on investors who would like to see their fleet change to more of a green fleet. And the customers are frankly demanding it. So new
Through
customers.
social justice, where banks refuse to do business
Yeah.
with coal companies, and so some coal miner that's worked at Suncoal most of his life, paid his taxes, goes to church twice a week, they don't want his money, and they don't want the company that he works for. So from what I'm hearing you saying is they're the ones that have created this mess that we're all getting ready to go through.
Well, I think some decisions are made because there's an aging coal fleet too. So sometimes the coal fleet is it's getting so old that it's not in the money anymore. I mean, that's another issue. When gas prices were lower, coal had a hard time in our markets running.
It did, but you and I both know that Henry Hub's had it still listed as the most affordable and reliable as
Sure.
long as it's been out there. So I hear a lot of that, but I've been around enough to know that when you actually look at the market out there, that those numbers can be manipulated. But please go ahead.
So I would just say that I think there's a number of reasons that coal is retiring quicker. I think the level of retirement that we're seeing is just not there's no precedent, and we can't seem to get enough resources in the ground on the other side to replace it with similar characteristics. So I think this gap is going to be an ongoing issue that we're going to see in the next 5 to 10 years.
Mr. Trim, if I might follow with a comment.
Go ahead.
You know, last year, this committee had tried to tackle a process to streamline the ability of getting the paperwork into place through best practices and all the requirements that need to be there so these companies could mine coal. They could get out there and get the job. They could drill their wells. They could do it responsibly and have this stuff in the market. But I think what you're having happen here is multiple things collapsing, and that's one of them. It's harder and harder to get out there to be able to get in compliance to even mine coal, even if there's a good market. But I just recently was in Lexington, Kentucky, and I had stopped at a place to grab something to eat, and I noticed on the wall back by the restrooms was a sign that showed a lawnmower, and had the lawnmower in this beautiful yard of Kentucky bluegrass coming up to a tree, and it was talking about the future of renewables. Well, we know that trees don't generate power, but there's a whole group of people out there that think that those lawnmowers literally are plugged into some sort of Mother Earth and that it makes everything perfect and that you can get electrical vehicle, electric lawnmower, electric weed eaters, all the stuff you want to. But that has to come from the back of people that are somebody out there hits the ground. They get up before the sun comes up and they don't go back to bed until it's dark, and they spend most of their days underground doing some kind of hard work that they're proud of. And this country is letting people that are making decisions that think these lawnmowers come to trees that are getting ready to pull Kentucky's economy into this hopper. When there's a great many of us that disagree with this very ardently. So I hate to see us go down this road. Last year, I think there was a big push to try to head this off, to try to streamline it. I think the federal government should take a hard look at whether they're helping or hurting. And I think I even challenge our state, because I know there's a lot of friends of the industry here that want to see us do it, to look at the policies out there, to look at some of the contracts right now that are just trying to get their permits renewed, and see what we can do to be able to get our coal to the market to help something like this from happening. Mr. Chairman, thank you for my comment.
Thank you, Co-Chairman. I think that at some point when we actually have, there may be some rationing to prevent blackouts or brownouts, where you go to a factory and say, you're going to have some reduction here. And, there ought to be some way that as policymakers, we can say to the Amazons and the Toyotas and these people that came in Kentucky demanding a certain percent of the energy they get be from renewables, that they're the first to maybe suffer those close and everything. So I think it's something we probably need to. I don't know how you could ever do that, but it's that's why we're in this position that we are in. So Representative Bridges, who's going to ask you about nuclear energy. I know what he's going to.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've heard you talk about the many years it takes to just build out the grid to service what we got, and that, and then I've heard the battery reliability. The technology is just not there, and it's becoming more evident every day that renewable energy is not sustainable because of the storage, the demand, the peak demands, that it's just not reliable for the base load on a day-to-day basis. And so I was not going to bring that topic up, but since the chairman brought it up, I see you've got 9% nuclear. Just your opinion for the next 25 years. I know that some of the carbon-free or the carbon reduction has easily been met because it can be switched from coal to natural gas. The problem is with what's going on the other side of the world and other problems with natural gas, that the prices are increasing, and now the affordability of it and everything is not workable either. But I've been told that for the 50 to 70% reduction, there's a lot of companies that are going to meet that earlier than 2025 to 2030. But that last 30 to 40% is being seen as impossible, because you the only way to do it is you do away with coal and you do away with natural gas.
That's right.
There is absolutely nothing out there.
Yep.
So I'm going to put you on the spot. What's your opinion? I mean, you go from Canada to the Gulf of Mexico.
Yep.
With many different areas, many different resources and everything. What do you see the answer? I mean, you're more professional than what any of us are sitting here, because you deal with it every day. I'm just asking. That's it. And I appreciate your endeavor, Mr. Chair.
Yeah. So So the question is, what's going to fill the void if we're going to try to get to 100% carbon free? And I think our analysis that MISO has done is it's almost impossible to get to 100% carbon free. I think in the short term, gas is your bridge fuel that you're going to have to convert coal to gas. You're going to have to build gas. I know hydrocarbons are a thing out there that could be possible in the future. And 20 years from now, we might see that become an economic thing. Small modular nuclear is possible. And I think people are looking at that pretty hard right now to see if there's an option for that. And then battery storage is going to have to get better and cheaper. Right now, it's about a 4-hour hold, and that doesn't hold you over Winter Storm Uri, right? It only holds you for 4 hours. So, but I think that combination is going to have to happen. I will say, we do have on our system about 30 gigawatts of wind. So we're pretty big on wind. We don't have as much solar. Kentucky will have solar. I mean, that's what's in your queue. And the diversity of the wind makes a difference. So it does perform, and it is dispatchable, by the way, on our system. But it's a nighttime kind of thing. Solar's a daytime kind of thing. And so something's going to have to bridge that gap when the sun's not shining, the wind's not blowing. And I think it's a natural gas thing for the next 15 years.
One more comment, Mr. Chair. I do see that with the new EPA ruling recently, that there may be a slight bit of hope there. Of course, it takes years. I understand that, but anyway, I do think it's sad that the war on coal, there were no efforts to try to clean it up or try to work with it or research put into it that should have been years ago. And I would hope that we see more research going in that way too. So, but anyway, I appreciate you and all you do, and thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chair.
Well, and along those lines too, I have concerns myself as we talk about the bridge fuel, and I like natural gas, heat my home with it. We run a lot of our businesses with it, but we talk strictly about carbon, and there's never any mention of methane, which in the short term is about 20 times more damaging in the atmosphere, and it just seems like that never gets talked about. And I really think there are no truly green, clean forms of energy, including wind and solar. So we do have a couple more questions. Representative Johnson, and the last one, Representative Wesley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question, going back to the nuclear topic, and we are starting to have some conversations about that, I think, in Kentucky. Do you see from your perspective, or hear from your perspective, outside of Kentucky but in the MISO region, conversations about nuclear or information that perhaps we should know about that maybe we aren't privy to just because we're in our own little world here? Do you have any suggestions on where somebody that might be doing it faster or better than us, and we might learn something?
There are other legislatures, actually in the MISO footprint, that are looking at nuclear. Indiana, I think, is another one that I can recall. I would say go to the Nuclear Regulatory the Association to talk about what they're looking at in small modular nuclear. Try to get yourself educated. I would get somebody to come talk about it, to be honest. I mean, nobody's done it yet, but I think it's on the radar more and more these days. We just closed one of the only, so this 8% just went down by half, I think. We just closed this year on May 31st a large 1,200 megawatt nuclear plant in Michigan. I mean, talk about green, power. That was part of the gap that we saw this year, was a 1,200 megawatt nuclear plant being retired. So yeah, I think there's a lot of people talking about how we could use nuclear going forward, but I think they're the best piece of information because they're looking at labs and other things and trying to figure out how to make it more economic. Because the only nuclear plant that's getting built right now is Vogtle. It's in Georgia, and its overruns are astronomical. I mean, so it's not a good model for what we can see nuclear going forward. So,
thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And one other thing too, we were talking about, some of the coal plants, as you said, had gotten to the end of their life
Yep.
cycle, but part of the problem in the past has been things like new source review, where we didn't allow people to upgrade these plants along to where they would have been less polluting, and and so there have been. Our friends in the federal government have not helped us at all, no matter which administration, Democrat or Republican. So there's a lot of reasons why we're in the position that we're in. So Representative Wesley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had maybe a comment. Traveling through a lot of the flatlands, Iowa, Missouri, Oklahoma, I've seen a lot of the windmills, and I just can't comprehend how do people expect to put them windmills here in Kentucky to produce some kind of generation of energy, and so that's what my statement and my question was earlier. How does people really plan to do that here in the bluegrass? And my heart just went out to all the coal miners over in eastern Kentucky, and so I just want to clarify that, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. And a final comment for Representative Blanton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it is a closing comment. Thank you for your presentation today. I think it's pretty clear that we're in trouble if we're trying to go all renewable, as some companies are today. We're going to be hurting. We're producing the cleanest coal we've ever produced. We're hearing about how that some of the elitists are not wanting to invest their monies in companies or in new plants, and so they're retiring them. Those are the same people that's going to complain when they're having blackouts. Those are the same people that claim they want to protect the poor and be there for them, when all they're doing is creating poverty in my region, because coal is a way of life for generations. It provides electricity. We're also overlooking the impact that coal is just not for electricity. You take met coal, it's used in the making of steel. There's many different products that are made from coal. Raw earth minerals are mined from coal. So are they even thinking along those lines and the damage they're doing to not just our coal industry, but to our citizenry, especially in my region of the state? Those people who have bought into the woke agenda of all this green energy, they might ought to look at countries like Germany, who tried this, and what do they find out? It doesn't work. And so what are they doing today? They are building coal-fired plants as fast as they can build them, because it's the most reliable source of energy. So we're shipping our coal to these other countries, and it's time that that logical minds that are thinking about our future and our people are making the decisions, and not letting the few who cry the loudest get their way, because all they're doing is creating a future for my granddaughter and our children that is not going to be near what the utopia that they believe it will be. And in order for us to get back on track, we got to get back to building coal-fired plants in Kentucky, not just in Kentucky, but in this country, and back to mining our coal. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Seymour, let me first thank you for a great presentation. It's one of the best that I think this committee has had. I think you can see the frustration that our committee has, because when I came here 28 years ago, we were 93% coal, our electricity. Now we're 69, and we're going even lower. We want you to understand that in no way was that frustration ever, sent to you, and because we know, what you're doing, and we just I think that you've actually helped us present and articulate why we continue to have concerns. And what I think you've done is you've let us know that those concerns are real. And because of your expertise and the things you're doing, anything that we need to be doing, let us know. And would you like to say anything else? But we certainly do appreciate you and your presentation. And where did you come from?
So I came from Carmel, the little Carmel, Indiana. So I drove down from Carmel this morning.
Oh, well, okay, you're a neighbor.
Yeah, I'm a neighbor.
Okay, well, that's great. But thank you so much, and
welcome.
we appreciate it. Members, thanks for staying for the entire meeting, and this meeting is adjourned.